Can I get a round of applause for y'all? Y'all look so beautiful today. Thank you so much for showing up today. The story I really want to get into is about being grown. And for me to tell that story, it does require some crowd engagement. I need you to feel this story for yourself. I need you to put yourself in my place when I tell this story. So whenever I say, "'cause why?" I need y'all to say, "because you're grown." You have to remind me, because throughout this story, I'm going to forget that. So whenever I say, "'cause why?" y'all say, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Now, a lot of us, if not all of us, always hit that point in life where you feel like your age has shown you that you're grown. You feel like your maturity has shown you grown. And some of us have this habit of living into that too early. For me, it started very young, like in middle school time. Pretty sure it was the first situation where I was feeling like I was grown when I really wasn't. I had the luxury of growing up as a military brat, and there were times where my father would have to go overseas. That was a spotlight moment for me to act out. Just gonna be honest. I'm the oldest male in the house. You can't tell me otherwise. Okay? I'm the man. Because why? No, I was in middle school. I already said that. Come on. I didn't know anything. I didn't know my elbow from a number 2 pencil. I was in middle school. But during that time, it didn't stop me from going to school and acting out. Telling the teacher, "I get it. You're trying to teach me something, but I really don't care because I'm the most important person in this room. I'm the smartest person in this room. So whatever you're trying to teach me is not as important as what I have to say." Got me labeled as a class clown. And then my mother had to step in. She had to tell me, "Yes, you can be a class clown all you want, but I'm going to show you that you're not the funniest person around." So my mother, bless her heart, she's standing right there in the back. My mother stripped my closet of everything. All my name brand shoes, my name brand pants, my name brand t-shirts, everything came out. She spent her hard-earned money to go out and buy me 14 shirts, 7 pants, and 1 pair of shoes. 7 of these shirts was cartoon shirts, before it was socially acceptable to wear those. Hot Wheels, Sesame Street, Pokemon, all the things that you wear in 2nd grade, I'm wearing those as a middle schooler. I'm still trying to figure out who I am, establish my friend group, affirm my identity, and I'm wearing Sesame Street t-shirts to school. But there was only 7 shirts. The other 7 that she did, you know those little, the printout papers that you can put onto the shirts? And she got in Microsoft Word and had the time of her life. One of them said, "My mommy dresses me." One of them said, it says 6th grader for life, but then it crossed out the 6 and had 7th above it because my grades were slipping because I was too preoccupied with being a class clown. One of them said, "Look at my bobos." And for those of you who don't know what bobos are, bobos is like you're walking around Walmart and you're looking down a shoe aisle and the 75-year-old walks up to you and says, "I bought those last week. They're really good pair of shoes." That's what bobos are, okay? All white Velcro sneakers. She put left on the right foot and right on the left foot, smiley faces on the back. And for 30 days, this is what I had to wear for school. Every day I showed up to school wearing these clothes because my mother had to prove to me, "You think you grow, but I'm going to show you that this is how you work in my house." So I had to wear that. Granted, it worked out. I have an ego through the roof now because if you can survive that, you can survive anything. What doesn't kill you definitely makes you stronger. But that was an experience where I had to grow because I was smelling myself too early, to say the least. The next time, at this point, I'm a high school graduate. Graduated high school. I'm 18. I'm feeling myself. Because why? Exactly. At this point, the law tells me I'm grown. I'm 18. I graduated high school. You can't tell me otherwise. Starting to go to college. Now, I've never been the type of person to skip out on school. Throughout middle school and high school, I was always worried about my parents getting a phone call like, "Hey, your son didn't show up to class today. What's up?" So, but college, they told you come when you want. Wait, You telling me I ain't got to show up here? I can just get the answers from somebody else and y'all gonna call it a day? That happened. Of course, my grades started to slip. My parents reminded me, hey, college ain't free. So they made me pay them back for the classes that I failed. But then other stuff started happening because, again, I was smelling myself too early. I was feeling myself too early. Because why? Exactly. I was under the assumption that all I had to do was, oh, okay, if I just go to work, cool. I can just pay what I want, and I ain't got to worry about nothing. And it had little rules my parents had. My mother was, respect my house, and everything's going to be fine. My father was, keep the peace, and everything's going to be fine. Well, I neglected both of those. Didn't care. One time my mother came down to my room because I wasn't supposed to be eating my rum. So sometimes I get caught eating my rum. So you had to dispose of the silverware real fast. One time she came through and found a bowl under the bed. Oh, she lost it. She lost it. She destroyed the room. She flipped everything upside down, emptied out the drawers, threw all the clothes everywhere. You will not disrespect my house while you're living in it. Why are you talking to me? I don't care. Because why? Exactly. This conversation we're not having. You don't like my room being dirty, just don't come in it. So what's that? Again, I would never say this now. I love you, Mom. But at that young age, that's what I was feeling because I wasn't there yet. Time goes on. I'm having this conversation with my mom. Father steps in. It's time. You got to go. At this point, you are disrupting the peace in the house. You are raising your mother's blood pressure. You cannot keep doing this. This was a conversation my parents had to me. And honestly, I'm looking at the bright side of it, to be honest. Like, okay, cool. I'm tired of y'all rules anyway. This is the perfect opportunity. Under the assumption that all I had to do was go to work and then I could buy whatever I want. And then I got out of the house and realized it's a lot harder than I originally thought. It's weird how that works. And it was never a disownership between me and my parents. It was, if you want to be like this, you have to do this outside of our house. We have rules and you are not following them. It is as simple as that. So they gave me a decent amount of time. They helped me move everything. I had to leave. And then I got a $500 rent a room, basically. And I hated it. It was this y'all didn't tell me this was what being grown was. It's bills. Bill. Phone? I gotta pay to call y'all? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And that goes into understanding what comes with actually being grown. And it got to a point where it was, I don't want to say impossible, but extremely overwhelming. I went from being able to stay out with my friends all night and just doing whatever I wanted to realizing, oh man, I got to pull in overtime this week so that I can make this ends meet. Granted, my parents were always there to help me, but at that point, I told y'all I didn't want to follow y'all rules. Why would I want to ask y'all for help? Because why? Exactly. And similar to Nick, growing up, my parents, I was a military brat. My parents were always, if you go military, go Air Force. It took about 9 months of me being out of myself before I said, hey, who wants to go to recruiter with me? And I went. I had to go because I didn't know what I was doing next with my life anyway. It was, I could have worked a mediocre job with no education background whatsoever, anything like that, because obviously I failed out of college, couldn't get through college, and just worked, and now I'm out of my parents' house. I had to figure out what was next for me. So I went to the recruiter. They offered me an aircraft mechanic job. I took it. I think I talked to the recruiter in February. I shipped out in November. And I saw it for a second, and it never hit until later down the road. But the day I shipped out, my father and my mother were there with me. And my mother was crying. And I'm like, come on, we're not doing this. Like, I don't have time for this. Because why? Exactly. Like, come on, you just let me go. You already let me out of the house. Let's not hold on to this. But then I went out there. I went through basic. I went to tech school. I got to my first duty station. I was stationed in Washington State. And the calls that I would give back to my parents, hey, I just did this. Hey, I'm scheduled to do that. Awards, deployments, events, all these other opportunities. And I would talk to my parents about it. And I can hear it in their voice that they were proud. Because now I'm finally stepping into that stone of being an adult. Now I can hear their voices with so much satisfaction. Because why? Now I'm finally grown. Now I'm handling my responsibilities. And the crazy thing about the military is they pay you to handle your responsibilities. You get paid to be responsible. They tell you what to do because that's what you're supposed to do as an adult, as a grown-up. And now I get it. Now I understand. It took all that for me to come to the conclusion to understand your age does not make you grown. The things you say you're going to do does not make you grown. Your attitude does not make you grown. Your responsibilities that you follow through with are what make you grown. The goals that you set for yourself and push through with the tank still on F, those are the things that make you grown. And it took for me to go through all of that to realize that I'm finally grown. Thank you so much.
Your theme clearly was about because I'm grown. Mm-hmm. And even though there are different moments that led up to that, what was your first moment to realize and truly know I'm an adult, I'm grown?
Being out, going across country. You're talking about growing up. I've been in Virginia, D.C., and Maryland my entire life. Once you go over to the other side of the country and survive by yourself, you're used to being within proximity of your parents, and then you go to the other side of the country, you're kind of by yourself. You have to learn people differently. Mm-hmm. You know, you can bring your friends around your mother and your father all day, and your friends will, your parents will say, oh, I don't know about that person, I don't know about this person, or something like that. Or you bring them around people that you came up with your whole life, and they're questioning them. When you go overseas and you have to start anew, mm-hmm. you have to make life-changing decisions, darn it on a fly for yourself. That's one of those moments where that was the first moment when I realized, like, oh, okay, I'm there.
What was your first bill that you paid?
Okay, so this one was because, again, I wasn't following my parents' rules. Insurance. They made me go on my own insurance because I knew what I was doing with my own car. I got this. Don't tell me what to do. I whip that. I'm good. And they was like, okay, you take your own insurance, and that's how we're going to handle that. That was the first bill I had to pay for myself was my insurance.
So, was there ever a time that your mom had to go to school in your moment that you thought you were grown?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I didn't know if I had time for that. Yes. During that time that I was wearing those clothes for the 30 days, my mother showed up to school. My mother and her best friend's husband showed up, and they embarrassed me. They showed up in the middle of an art class, I'm pretty sure. And I don't know how they knew, but that class was right before lunch. They embarrassed me in lunch. I don't know how we got to this point where they called over my middle school crush and embarrassed me in front of her. Somehow I ended up dating her afterwards, but again, like putting me through the gauntlet.
So thank you, Mom.
Thank you, Mom. Crazy how that works. But yes, no, they definitely embarrassed me in front of my crush, as well as the entire cafeteria.
So I have a similar story with my daughter that I would always tell them. I would say, listen, if I ever have to show up to school for anything for you, I will show up in a robe, a mask on my face, rollers in my hair, and slippers on my feet. Because I'm grown and I can get through that, but you still have to go through school and manage what's going to happen and deal with what your friends have to say. So I say all that to say I am team mom, and I am so on board with everything she did. and I would not change a thing differently from it.
Look, you're saying that you wore an outfit. My mother showed up with nothing but her personality, and it was the most deadliest thing on the planet. It was
I love
deadly.
it. I love it.
But it taught me a good lesson. I will say that.
Mhm.
Out of that, it's like, okay, now you realize what happens when you're really the center of attention. And it's not really what you want. Because I've made you the center of attention. This is what you wanted, right? You wanted to be the spotlight. And here you are.
Tell us about your podcast. How does all of that bring you full forward today, and how that's impacted you to do that?
So I have a podcast network company. It's called Young Creative Culture Entertainment. I produce multiple podcasts, and it started with the first one, Our Sins and Woes. I always thought, growing up, for me as a millennial, it was very hard for us we're that most ignored generation. If anybody's a millennial, they'll understand me 100%. But the millennials are the most ignored generation because you have the older generation, Generation X, which is usually, I've already done everything you do. You can't tell me anything. I've already lived your life. And then you have Generation Z, which is, I can find all the answers through the internet. The millennials are the sweet spot where we're just ignored on both sides, which is crazy because we're that perfect connection for both sides. We're that bridge between Generation X and Generation Z. But we are still a very ignored race when we grew up during that technology. We grew up with the internet. We grew up with the cell phones. We grew up with all that technological advancement. And with Our Sins and Woes, it started because I wanted to give a platform for the millennials to be able to speak freely about their complaints, their mistakes, their everything that they have an issue with, whether it be something they've gone through or something they see somebody else talking about. So that's where that's where the podcast started. And about 40 episodes into Our Sins and Woes, I wanted to branch out. I wanted to I realized I had a platform to be able to speak freely. And I wanted to make sure that a lot of people got that space to speak freely. So then I added 4 more podcasts on. As Penrose said earlier, I have a show with him called Protest and Riot. It's a show where he's from a different generation than me. So we talk about the arguments that the world is having today. We take news articles and society standpoints and make arguments out of them. Is this a protest or is this a riot? Is this something that should be a calm, collected conversation, or is this something where you got to flip the kitchen table? I have another podcast that I produce called Tunes and Tantrums. 2 artists, and all they do is talk about the music and the music industry. And the industry is very important because anybody can talk about what their favorite album is. But if you're really enveloped in the music industry, then you want to know what the labels are talking about, what the artists are going through outside of everything. So Tunes and Tantrums is another one that I produce. Blurred Watch. It's 2 young men, my younger brother, and a cameraman of mine's younger brother, and they talk about everything that is comic books, TV shows, movies, everything that comes out new. They're talking about reviewing, giving their take on it. Does it need to happen like that? Does it not need to happen like that? That kind of stuff. And then the last one is called the Sticks Podcast. It's a video game and video game industry podcast. So when I started doing Our Sins and Woes, it was kind of like this would be fun. Podcast seemed cool. And then I started doing it for a while, and I was like, other people need this opportunity. For you to just come in and just talk for an hour or 2 about something you're very passionate about. People need that kind of space because we live in a culture where unless you find that specific audience, everybody will shut you down.
I want to go back. You chose an interesting word, ignored.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say that it's where you were ignored, or you guys didn't always create the opportunities, or the opportunities weren't created for you? And now the platform that you have created is because you did take those steps. So again, I go back to the word of ignored, meaning that people choose to dismiss you. And I don't think it's where because I'm not a millennial, and I don't think that we dismiss you. I think we do have a difference in how we see things from different generations, but I just find the word ignored, just an interesting choice.
I will wholeheartedly stand by ignored, only because it's in the question of like, do you think that we didn't take advantage of the opportunities that we had? But again, we grew up in a technology age. Podcasts are old, but podcasts aren't like, they haven't been around for that long. People have not been tuning in. Now podcasts are one of the most viewed audio sources you're gonna come across. But before, it wasn't that. When we were younger, it wasn't that. And you may not feel like you have ignored millennials, but if you go out and talk to a bunch of millennials, they feel like when they're talking, nobody's listening. And that's usually the end result, is when you're going out and talking to a bunch of people, they don't feel like they're being heard.
Do we have any millennials in the room now? Do you ladies agree with that? That you feel ignored? Interesting. Jeff, you feel ignored as well? How many non-millennials feel ignored? Oh. Okay. I don't know that I think that's a fascinating statement.
But that's a conversation millennials have amongst themselves.
Okay.
And it's like, I can't go to my parents and let me iterate this for a second. I never felt like I was ignored inside my household. But I know if I talk to a generation above me, it's harder for them to hear my argument as opposed to me talking to somebody my age. I can still feel like I can.
Come on up.
Don't.
See, no. We did all this for you.
Coming up here, but
this is hilarious.
I
am loving this.
The ignore part. I don't think that we ignore you as. I think that when we don't share the same interests, you're not interested, and neither am I. So when we talk about things that we are both interested in, or things that we share commonality with, then everything is good. But when you're talking about something that doesn't make sense to me, or vice versa, is that when you feel ignored?
And again, this isn't about our household. I don't feel ignored in our household.
But from the perspective of my age versus your age.
And when you're talking about I'm loving this. Thank you, Mom, for coming up on stage. I appreciate this so much. From a generational standpoint, because at the end of the day, you are of the older age, and therefore you have the last say. That's where the ignore comes in. Although we may have a difference of opinion, because you're the elder, what you say goes. And that's when the ignored kicks into play. We might have a disagreement, but if there was ever a situation where we disagreed and I had that last say, or I had the final word in it, then it would be a different conversation, but that's never the case.
Okay. I'm just asking because I would never want any generation to feel ignored. I just think that there's some things that we see, versus what you all see. And so that's the disconnect. And no matter how much you may try to get me to understand, some things that y'all do, your generation, doesn't make sense to me.
I agree.
And y'all just think we're old, like we're born old, we don't know anything.
Remember how I said the Generation X, whenever they say, I've already done everything you've done, you're not surprising me anymore. We were doing a whole table talk.
Yeah, that's like it. That's all right.
Very
So I'm gonna have you stand up.
Hello, Mom. How are you doing today? I'm good. I'm good.
So, so the perspective that I got it from was when I kind of like, after that moment where my dad, on my grandfather's funeral, he told me he was proud of me. It was like really the first time that ever happened. And from that moment, I grown up. At that point, it took me a long time, but I finally got there. And so I got involved in my community. I got involved in politics. And there was just this era that they just looked at me and they shook their head and they told me I wanted to do everything. And then it just felt like they weren't listening at all. They kept on doing the same things over and over and over again. And I finally realized they weren't actually listening to me. They're stubborn, they're set in their ways, and they don't really care. And it's not the entire generation. It's a generation that's kind of has power, and it's like they don't want to let anybody else in, whether it's in business or whether it's in politics. And that's where I get my perspective from.
I agree with that. And the thing is, and like I said, for the household, it's a lot different. The energy I get from y'all in the household is not the same energy I get from talking to somebody your age that I don't know from a can of paint. So when I come across somebody that may be of your generation, I don't get like their attentiveness. I do get the ignored. From y'all have to listen to me. You're my parents. You're supposed to. So it's different from y'all. But when I come across other people within that generation, it is hard to get heard.
And like you said, I don't think it's everybody, because I work with some older people and like they are so happy that we're there because they're like, oh, I'm so willing to learn. But then you get some, it's like, no, I'm not listening to you. This is how it is. This is how I'm going to do it. And yeah, I'm like, okay, well, Phil, that's fine.
Don't you attack my mother.
Hi, I did not catch your name, so I'll just address you as Mom.
Mom.
Mom. But I was wondering if you ever felt like, when you were your son's age, did you ever feel like you felt ignored by the older generations? Like, did you maybe have a similar experience of feeling ignored? Because I do wonder, maybe, I remember when I was a teen and just like feeling like nobody ever listened to me, and I'm just wondering, is this kind of part of the natural course of things over a lifetime kind of situation? So I just kind of wanted to get your perspective on that, if maybe you could kind of empathize or had similar experiences.
Okay, that's a good question. No, the only time that I felt ignored was when I was a middle child in the household. You're kind of, the mom focused on the oldest child and the youngest child, but at Nelson's age, I was already in the military for a few years, married, had a child. But even before that, I was focused on my career. So when I graduated high school, I didn't know really what path I wanted to take. So I joined it. I went into the Army. And so when you're around a bunch of military people, when that is your community, you don't feel ignored. So I really, and the commonality amongst the military is it doesn't matter if you're older or if you're younger, you all have the same, you're all working towards the same thing. So I didn't experience that, so that's why I'm trying to understand, how do we connect? How do the millennials, the Generation X, how do we all, or the Generation Z too, how do we all connect and be able to share a commonality? You know what I mean?
So I have a comment from the audience. We have 2 comments from the audience?
So I'm a millennial, but I got a whole different perspective on it. I'll be honest, a lot of my peers, a lot of things are lost in facts, right? So for a lot of older people, facts actually matter. Statistics matter. I'm gonna be honest, our generation and behind us, facts and stats don't matter. That's real talk. So for me, in my experience, when I've had to deal with people that are older, personally, I'm always a person that's rooted in logic. So even older, younger, if I lock horns with you mentally, if you're not in lockstep with me mentally, logically, you're out the door anyway. So it's not even a matter of whether I'm being ignored or not. I already don't even consider that person if there's no logic rooted in their train of thought. You see what I'm saying? So, and for older generations, a lot of time it is logic. Logic is based off of experience, right? So in my endeavors, right, I have certain experiences that I've actually encountered, but at the same time, I have a different mentality and I can look at things from a different perspective and be heard in certain instances more times than not.
I'd agree with that statement, but for the premise of the reason why this all came up was because we were talking about the premise of the podcast. And the one thing I definitely include in the beginning of every episode is the dumb mistakes, the dumb complaints, the dumb opinions, and the dumb perspectives. It's not the facts from the millennials that are getting ignored. It's our thoughts. It's our opinions. Whatever the facts say is whatever the facts. But if you're asking me what do I think about something and I tell you what I think and you're ignoring me, that's where the disconnect is. And that's why I say the disconnect is not just between millennials and our older generation, but it's the disconnect between the younger generation too, because they can get their opinions from the internet now, just like that. Google will auto-complete your sentence when you ask a question about an opinion, and that's crazy to me. So that's why I say, like, in the aspect of facts, you're absolutely right. We do sway our facts a little or basically overcap our facts with opinions. But in the argument of opinions, that's where the disconnect is between the younger generation and the older generation, and our generation and the older generation, our generation and the younger generation.
So, talking about facts and talking about older generation, I ran for Congress. I'm in politics. And one of the things that I tell people all the time is that money shouldn't and hasn't always been a main factor in politics. And the older generation that have been there for a long time that are using that for their own profit tell me, yes, it has. It's always been a thing. And it doesn't matter how many facts I bring out of the history books to tell them that they're wrong. They don't want to listen to it because it takes their wealth away. It takes their power away. And it's deciding what facts to listen to is when they're not letting us be heard or letting us voice. Because there's a new generation that doesn't see this as a way to gain wealth, but a way to stabilize our society so we can live in peace amongst ourselves.
I just because I'm a little bit older than you, and I think me and Kia, we kind of fit right in that gap of the how we became ignored. When you're born in that generation, when the Nintendo came out, the Atari came out, CDs came out. When the 6 CD changer came out, my mother was like, "What is this contraption?" How? It's the 90s. You should know this. You just had a VCR. At that time, though, when we're going into our adulthood, immediately technology changes, the world changes, and our parents come from a generation too. If you think about it, clearly I wasn't there in the 60s and 70s, but when you hear about what happened, the life just kept changing, and y'all had to keep being new people. The 80s and the 90s, we talked about this on our show. We come from a throwaway society. There was so much money in the 90s, you didn't have to care about anything. So while we're trying to learn, y'all are trying to adapt to the new math that they said we was being taught. By the time we get out of school, I'm watching my niece multiply doing this down the page. No, what? So things change. It's almost like everything is built for a generation, for that group of people. But we came up in a time where there's a split. We're that last group that literally was in the garden with our grandmothers picking peas. We're that last group. My son cannot fathom a world where a cell phone doesn't exist. You see what I'm saying? We're that last generation that used the rotary phone. So when we say we get ignored, it's because as elementary, middle school, y'all dealing with us in one way. And it's the right way because that's just the way the world works. As soon as it switched over, we're not new kids, you're not new parents, but the world is giving us new things to have to adjust to on the fly. So there was nobody to be like. So like when the kids that came after us, everything is digital. The kids before us, everything was still the typewriter. You know people that still used to use the whiteout on the typewriter? There's some people in there that's looking at me like, what's the typewriter and why would you use whiteout on it? We're that generation. So I feel like when we started off, and you got to think too, we've always, one thing I think we got tricked, at least me, turning 18 in the year 2000 and everybody making that so mystical, it kind of mess you up because you're thinking, I'm amazing. I'm about to graduate in 2000. And again, the world changes and you just realize nobody cared that you was about to graduate in 2000. You're out in the world. I don't care that it's different for you. I don't care that you have to learn and the new things that you should have been prepared for as an adult. Some of your parents couldn't teach you because we just flipped the script. And so I think that's what, when we say ignored, it's because we come from a split type of situation. You know what I mean? And so you don't have time to concentrate on those people all at once. The kids that came after us, every parent knows how to the work that, you know, when the iPads first came on, it was just the way life was. We just caught that in the middle of being teenagers and just coming out of immediately. Dude, do you know the first time I used the iPod, I was like, what is this? The CD player was just rocking like last year. Like, so when things change like that and you're forced to deal with it, y'all don't have to deal with it. We're the generation growing up in it. It's just our parents. And so, calm down. Calm down.